You will not believe the financial engineering, the new accounting gimmick that is the plan to get over the debt ceiling. Obviously, politically speaking, the debt ceiling has been an issue for a long time. However, ever since the existence of the debt ceiling in the first place, every time our government has hit it, they've just voted and raised that ceiling right up. So in reality, it's not so much a debt ceiling, it's just a leftover remnant, a fragment of something that older and wiser people put in place to try and restrain our government from spending. But now, as we'll look at, there's an idea for financial engineering, an accounting gimmick called premium bonds. So if you've never heard of premium bonds before, you're gonna be in for a treat here. This is just a wild idea that from a math perspective, actually there's nothing wrong with this. I'm gonna walk you through why. We're gonna have to do a little bit of math here. Don't worry, I'm gonna draw some diagrams with my amazing artistic skills. However, from a rational standpoint and a logical standpoint, what this would do is just make it easier for more government spending. So we look at the debt ceiling as, just like I said, a fragment of the past that doesn't need to exist. But don't tear down fences if you don't know why they were built in the first place. And the debt ceiling is a perfect example of that. We'll get more into that in a moment. So as detailed in this recent article on Bloomberg, there is a plan called premium bonds. So first, let's look at a way that a regular bond works when the government borrows money. First, they want to borrow $100 from you. So they borrow $100, and let's say in 1 year, they're going to give you back $105. Now that right there, they're borrowing $100, they're gonna pay you back $105 in 1 year. Obviously, that is a 5% interest rate. Now, you give them $100, you get $105 back. That means that the government's total liability there is what? Just realistically, is it $100 or is it $105? Well, obviously it's $105 because in a year, they're gonna have to give you $105. So that is their real obligation, their real liability. However, when the government issues a bond, the government's debt goes up by the face amount of the bond. What that means is when we look at the government borrowing $100 from you, instead of the government's debt going up by $105, it says that their debt only goes up by $100. So the national debt number that you're looking at, that's just this number, the amount that they originally borrowed. It does not include what they will actually owe back, which is what they borrowed plus the interest. In addition, this is how the debt ceiling works. The debt ceiling statute caps the face amount of obligations. That is the principal amount, not the interest that it has to pay. Now you might think, well, this really doesn't matter because this is the way they've been doing it for a long time and clearly it's worked out kind of okay. And so it doesn't matter whether or not they say that their total debt is $100 if they actually owe $105, because in the end, they still have to pay back that $105. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because it introduces an accounting gimmick, a little trick that would allow them to completely circumvent the debt ceiling and have that no longer be an issue that prevents them from spending. And here's why. Let's start off with this example where we have $100 borrowed and $105 paid back. That is the exact same thing as $200 borrowed and then $210 paid back. This is just you loaning and buying two of those bonds rather than one. Same interest rate, 5%. But there is a third option that might sound completely bonkers, but the math might actually check out. What if the government borrows $100, but still pays back $210? Well, you might look at that and think, well, that's preposterous because that's a 110% interest rate, and you'd be correct. But here's the deal. These bonds are not in isolation. There's not just one of them. There's a whole market of them out there, which means that there are people buying and selling these all day long. And so if you could loan $100 for 5%, or $200 for 5%, would you loan $100 for 110%? Absolutely. In fact, literally everybody would jump at the chance for this. So much so that there would be somebody willing to lend $110 to get $210 back, which means that there would also be somebody willing to lend $150 to get $210 back. There'd be so much money willing to lend at this stupid high interest rate that immediately it would bid the price of that bond up to just around $200. So the government could say, from an accounting perspective on paper, they could say, we're borrowing $100 from you. But if you want us to borrow $100 from you, we're actually going to charge you $200 to borrow $100 from you. So instead of actually taking $100, we're actually going to take $200. And then when we pay this loan back to you, we'll pay you $210. So it's actually identical to the 5% loan here because everybody else is already loaning to the government at, let's say, 5%, whether it's $100 or $200. And so this new loan, even though it's called a $100 loan, would actually cost $200 because it would match what everybody else is already loaning to the government at. And even though the stated interest rate is, 110%, in reality, it's only costing them 5% because they're getting $200, giving back $210. Same thing as before. The only difference is what it's called on paper. And that makes a difference because the debt ceiling is just on the principal amount and the government's debt goes up by just the face amount. And so if the government took $200 from you by borrowing $100 and was going to pay you back $210, essentially it would only increase the national debt by $100. This means that the debt ceiling immediately would become irrelevant because every time they have to pay back, again, $100, all they would do is issue another $100 of debt, but they would get $200 for it. Again, nothing changes with the math of how much money they're spending, what they're actually borrowing, and what they actually have to repay, their actual obligations. All it changes is on paper what's going on. So what are the issues with this? Well, number one, currently it's against the rules. It's not against any laws. It's not something Congress would have to change, but it's against the rules set by the Treasury. As the author of this article points out, the Treasury has rules about debt issuance. That if they're going to issue new bonds, it has to be at the same price of the face amount. However, these rules are set by the Treasury, and the Treasury can change these rules at their own discretion. So if the Treasury decided that, hey, we're going to default because this debt ceiling issue isn't going to get resolved this time, they could do this on a dime and they could circumvent the debt ceiling. So that's the first issue with this. The second issue is the market's reaction to this. Because if the government has to resort to saying that they're borrowing 100 when they're actually trying to borrow 200 and they're going to give back the same 210, well then the market might be a lot more likely to not use this new debt and only use the old debt, or if they are going to use the new one, they're not going to give the full 200, maybe they only give 199. And then there really would be a little bit of a premium on the interest, which would then cost the government more in the end. And so it might not be the best idea for the government because this would just be a way to make them, spend more money on interest on their already monstrous national debt pile. But the third issue with this, in my opinion, is the biggest issue of all, which I mentioned in the beginning. If you don't know why a fence was built, don't tear it down. The debt ceiling exists for a purpose, to stop or at least slow down government spending, because the government cannot spend any money it does not first take from somebody else. Whether it's from borrowing, from taxes, or through inflation, where those new dollars only have purchasing power as a result of taking that purchasing power away from existing dollars, all government spending power comes from someone else. It is a transfer of spending power. And we also know that the government only spends money on things that people wouldn't already be spending that money on. Otherwise, there would be no change to have the government come in and try and spend that money. The government is not going to come in and take $15 out of your pocket and hand it straight to Netflix. Now, maybe they'll come in, take $15 out of your pocket, keep $5 and pass $10 on to Netflix. But again, that's something you wouldn't do. You wouldn't voluntarily choose to just transfer some of your money to a politician's pocket for no reason at all, just to hand the rest of the money to a company like Netflix. And so government only spends money in a way that it wouldn't have been spent otherwise. So therefore, it is a net drain on society every dollar that the government spends. Now, you may argue that that net cost is a necessary cost, but it is a net cost. And so the debt ceiling, however useless it is, and however much gridlock happens, and however much political fighting happens every time that issue comes up, it's there for a reason, which is to slow down government spending, which is a good thing, not a bad thing that we should be trying to circumvent. We want more friction for government spending, not less. We want it harder for them to take our hard-earned money, our hard-earned purchasing power, and waste it on something else. We don't want to grease those skids. Unfortunately, we are more than likely to see more and more political fighting, more and more financial irresponsibility, and more debt, more spending, more inflation, more deflation, more financial instability as we move along here. It's likely to get worse before it gets better. So that means we're probably going to see more and more of these types of gimmicks like this one and this premium bomb and the $1 trillion coin and other things like it at least get talked about and maybe even get implemented, which is why I'm not going to be placing my faith in fiat and just hoping that they decide to preserve my purchasing power and not continue confiscating it against my will. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.